Welcome back, Guardians. In the last report, we discussed and provided context for the events directly after the bargain between the three sisters and the Worm Gods. In those books, we saw that the three sisters took their first morphs, the King, Mother, and Knight, and these morphs are both symbolic and direct representatives of what each could and would later accomplish. But in the last report, the most important revelation was the direct change the Krill people would make, as we would no longer be able to call them Krill. As they once accepted the worm and worm larvae, they would become the Hive. And this change is incredibly necessary to present. This is a change not just occurring with the three exiled royals, but an entire people. A change likened to humans becoming awoken during the collapse, or humans becoming exos sometime during the Golden Age. It is a literal, physical change that allows for the same consciousness to embody a new flesh. And this covenant of science and flesh, of despair and necessity, was made possible by the machinations of worm gods, playing off the desires of the three sisters. As we continue to discuss the books of sorrow, this report will discuss the immediate conquest of Fundament's moons by the King, the Mother, and Knight, and the Hive's first conquest beyond their home planet's surface. We are free from Fundament's moon, and Savathun's cutters are ready to fly. With Xivu-Arath victorious, we have opened a wound at Kaharn, a wound leading to geostationary orbit. Behold, we are faithful to our covenant. We have no future on Fundament, but our moons will make fine habitats. Let us rise. And rise the Hive would. It's difficult to truly determine exactly what Savathun's cutters were, but we can speculate they are space-worthy craft, as Savathun always showed a keen interest in technology, especially that of Fundament species and their continent-moving engines. Well, that's the likely choice. Guardian reports discussing the practices of Hive tomb ships describe them cutting into an area and then deploying troops just before cutting out. Perhaps these cutters were the precursors to the Hive tomb ships, as a mode of transportation described by the worms, and Guardian reports do share some similarities. Hive technology has always been described as closely linked to magic, but as you may know, any technology significantly advanced is indistinguishable from magic. And while the worm gods are described as having certain non-quantifiable traits, it's highly unlikely it cannot be explained with a scientific basis. A secondary point to note is that the emotions of the three sisters, and consequently the Hive as a whole, can be detected and interpreted by the host worm. For example, the devastation and inherent change of the Krill people into the Hive undoubtedly would weigh heavily on any leader, especially if that leader was responsible for said change. And Arax, regardless of the countless deaths and extinctions he would ultimately become responsible for, was not immune to the severe weight of such calamity, such epic collateral loss. At times, we detect sadness in you. Understand, long thinker, that you enact a sacred and majestic task. Existence is the struggle to exist. Only by playing the game to its final, unconditional victory can we complete the universe. Your war is divine work. And that was the argument of the worm gods, that what Arax, his new brother Xivu-Arath, and the steadfast sisters Savathun were about to undertake was a holy war. A war predestined by divine and righteous deities that are serving a purpose best suited for all creation, for all life. That purpose, you may ask, the death of the weak, the destruction of the meek, the culling of the unintelligent, and the ultimate removal of the unworthy. This is the worm god's overall goal, forcing the universe to create a species that can survive the heat death of the universe, through the elimination of those who were deemed unable. And while it can be argued, although I recommend this conversation take place further from the more conservative ears that occupy our various groups against the darkness, that the worm god's goal is not one we should not strive for. Heat death will eventually come to the universe, billions, if not trillions of years from now, and to survive that, we would need to crown oneself master of life and perhaps death. But the removal of those species that are incapable or unwilling to be as ruthless and brutal about their movement towards the worm's goal is the notion we cannot agree with. It is the notion we must battle against, regardless if their desire is for the betterment of all life. The worm's route to get there is inherently evil and should not only be accepted as inevitable, but an unfortunate way to escape the universe's apparent but ever far end. But I digress. We can debate and present the argument of the worm and its validity at a later date. For now, let us continue our exposition of the Books of Sorrow. As the Hive obtained their knowledge to escape Fundament by cutting holes into space, a knowledge learned after occupying the Kaharn Bastion, a scientific or perhaps academy of some kind on Fundament, the Hive would turn their gaze onto Fundament's 52 moons. The 52 moons of Fundament host a star-faring civilization far more sophisticated than anything you've encountered so far. Tawik's ships fled towards the large ice moon, where a species of bony, six-armed cephalopods keeps their icy capital. Savathun named them the Ammonites. The war on the Ammonites would be devastating, but it would refocus the goal of the Hive and that of the worm, that the 53rd moon in the orbit of Fundament was the Traveler. The worms would argue and suggest to the three sisters that the Traveler was responsible for the movement of Fundament's moons, perhaps in the hopes of eliminating the worm gods and all the potential species that would serve them. The three sisters and the Hive that formed under their influence were motivated by obtaining revenge against Tawix the Betrayer, but their goal aligned well with the worm's ideal hope of the sky's demise in the death of the Traveler. The war against the Ammonites was not as simple a task as the conquest of Fundament, as showcased in Book 15, titled Born as Prey. The Hive war against the Ammonites was slowing to a halt, and after a series of defeats on Fundament's 6th moon, it had seemed the worm's symbiosis with the Krill had been misplaced. All the while, Arax, de facto leader of the Hive, suffered from an internal moral battle that ultimately distracted him from the war at hand. Make him understand that the ideals of peace and stability he clings to are cancers, brutal, unjust obstacles between us and a fair cosmos. These are the bait stars the sky uses to blind its slaves. Arax had hoped, perhaps even wished, that after their escape from Fundament's God Wave, the removal of the other species and the death of Tawix were minor needs, shoved against more vital necessities, such as a sanctuary and the reconstruction of a new Hive homeworld, far removed from Fundament's life-snuffing predators. But it's interesting, odd almost, that a series of books devoted to the Hive's divinity would showcase one of their leaders as so weak-willed, in direct opposition to Oryx Guardians would later face in the Rings of Saturn, fighting across his ascendant realms. Perhaps this is to provide valuable context to the complexity of the Hive's leadership, or perhaps it is an addendum made by one of Oryx's direct rivals, notably Savathun. We will undoubtedly begin to see a feverish rivalry develop between these three sisters, but for now, the Ammonite War would be the definitive moment in the Hive conquest. As we finalize this report, I'd like to ask you, Guardians, what you believe. Is the worm logic legitimate? Is it something that should be explored? Perhaps not to the levels of no remorse showcased by the Hive brutality, but surely there is merit in developing oneself, one's species, and its legacy into surviving all death, especially the universe's ultimate end. Perhaps, in a way, this is what we've been doing, forcing ourselves against those who covet our slumbering god. After all, after Oryx's defeat, Guardians and the Light have proven that we are the most brutal. We are the apex creation. And through our resolve, all enemies are subject to elimination. More on the Books of Sorrow in my next report. Hey everyone, Wally here. If you'd like to support the channel further, please feel free to check out the script link, my Patreon, and the new apparel in the Spreadshirt shop, all linked down below. If you want to join the conversation on our Discord server, we allow everyone in. Like the video if you enjoyed the content, and subscribe for more.